Welcome to Permission to Breathe, a transformative podcast dedicated to providing a safe space where you can inhale deeply and exhale freely while embracing your grief journey unapologetically. I am your host, Dr. Tammy Isaac, a spiritual practitioner, grief advocate and educator, author, and your guide on this journey through grief. This space was born out of the understanding that grief is not just an event, it's a lifelong unfolding. It's layered, it's complex, and often it's silence. And here is where we disrupt the silence. We will talk about the grief that lingers after the food stops arriving at your door, the grief that remains when no one calls and no one comes by to check on you. The grief that's complicated, the grief that's ancestral, the grief that lives in your body long before it ever reaches your tears. Every episode, we honor the humanity of grief, the anger, the confusion, the numbness, the longing, and we do so without apology. Whether you're navigating fresh loss, unspoken sorrow, or the weight of a world that just won't pause, this podcast invites you to sit down, breathe deeply, and give yourself the permission you've been waiting for to grieve, to feel, to breathe. Let's begin. Some people feel everything after loss. The tears come without warning. The ache sits close to the surface, showing up in every conversation, memories, and quiet moments. Others feel nothing at all. No tears, no sadness, no anger, just quiet. A flatness that can feel confusing and unsettling or even alarming. Emotional numbness is one of the least talked about grief responses, not because it is rare, but because it does not look like what we expect grief to look like. When there are no tears, no visible breakdown, no strong emotional reaction, people often begin to question themselves. Am I avoiding my grief? Did I not love them enough? Why do I feel so disconnected when something so significant happened? This episode is for anyone who has asked those questions silently, for anyone who feels detached, blank, or emotionally muted after loss and wonders if they are doing grief wrong. Here, we name emotional numbness for what it is, a real and valid response, not a lack of love, not a sign of weakness, and not a failure to grieve. If you have been waiting to feel something and judging yourself because you have not, this conversation is for you. Let's take a deep breath and let's begin. Emotional numbness is not the absence of grief. It is the body and nervous system responding to loss in a protective way. When what has happened feels so heavy, too sudden, or too complex to process all at once, the system slows emotional access so you are not so overwhelmed. Grief is not only emotional, but it's also physical. It affects the brain, the nervous system, sleep, appetite, concentration, and energy. When the impact of loss exceeds what the system can safely hold in the moment, then numbness becomes a stabilizing response. It creates space. It keeps things contained until there is more capacity to feel. Numbness is not about something you choose. It is something that happens automatically. It is the body saying, this is a lot and we need to pace this. For some people, numbness shows up immediately after loss, and for others, it will appear later once the adrenaline wears off or the responsibilities kind of quiet down. And it can come and go, right? It can feel unsettling because it does not match the grief story that we are used to hearing or seeing or maybe even experiencing. Numbness can look like feeling emotionally flat or distant from yourself and or others. Moving through daily life can feel like you're on autopilot. Difficulty crying even when you think that you should, and not reacting strongly to news or memories or milestones, saying I'm fine and realizing it feels true even when the loss is very significant. This response brings confusion, to yourself and to people. And people expect pain to be loud. When it is quiet, instead, they worry. They are disconnected, uncaring, or avoiding something that's very important. But numbness is not about denial. Denial refuses reality, and numbness knows exactly what has happened. It simply regulates how much of it can be felt at one time. It's not avoidance, because avoidance is actively pushing it away, but numbness is a passive protection. Emotional numbness is about regulation. It is the nervous system keeping you steady when grief would otherwise feel unmanageable. Emotional numbness often happens when a loss overwhelms the body's sense of safety. This is especially true with traumatic or sudden losses, when death, separation, or major change happens without warning. The nervous system may not yet feel secure enough to release emotions. Instead of flooding the body with pain all at once, it limits emotional access to prevent overload. So long-term caregiving losses can lead to numbness as well. So when someone has spent months or years anticipating loss, managing medical decisions, or holding steady for another person, the body often remains in a very guarded state even after the loss occurs. The system has learned to stay alert, practical, and controlled. When the caregiving role ends, the body does not automatically shift into an emotional release. It may stay braced because that is what it knows. That is what it is used to doing. Now, numbness can also develop when losses stack on top of each other. Multiple losses in a short period of time can exceed emotional capacity. Instead of processing each one fully, the system slows everything down, and numbness becomes a way to pause the emotional load until there's more space to tend to it. And many people experience numbness because they were required to stay strong for others. People like parents and partners, caregivers, leaders, and helpers often suppress their own needs so they can function. When grief arises, the habit of holding it together does not immediately disappear. The body continues to prioritize responsibility over the emotional expression. Numbness is also common when there was no space to grieve at the time of loss. So some people had to return to work quickly. Others managed family dynamics, legal matters, or crisis. And when grief has no room to be felt, it often goes quiet rather than loud. Early life experiences also matter too. So if emotions were discouraged, minimized, or punished growing up, the nervous system may have learned that feeling is unsafe. And in moments of loss, numbness can surface as a familiar protective response rather than an emotional choice. In all of these cases, numbness is not about avoidance. Remember that, please. It is about survival. It is the body choosing stability over overwhelmness. It is grief moving at a pace the system believes that it can manage. Feeling nothing does not mean nothing is happening. It means the body is just holding what it can until it feels safe enough to release more. One of the hardest parts of emotional numbness is not the numbness itself. It is what people begin to tell themselves about it. Many quietly wonder if feeling nothing means they did not love deeply enough. They replay memories, relationships, and moments of connection, trying to measure whether their grief matches the significance of the loss. When tears do not come, they assume something is missing in them. And others fear that emotions maybe will never return. They wonder or worry that this flatness may be permanent, that joy, sadness, and connection have somehow shut down for good. This fear can be especially heavy when people around them seem to be moving through visible weaves or waves of grief while they remain emotionally distant and constantly emotionally distant. There is also a strong cultural expectation about how grief should look. So crying is often seen as proof of mourning. Silence is mistaken for avoidance. When someone is not visibly emotional, they may feel pressure to perform grief in ways that feel inauthentic or forced. Guilt often enters the picture too. So life continues, responsibilities remain, moments of laughter or normalcy still happen. When those moments arrive alongside numbness, people question whether they are moving on too quickly or leaving something unfinished behind. But grief does not follow one emotional script, thank God. There is no single pattern that proves love or loss. And this is where we get mixed up with people and begin to judge people because we feel like people should be responding in a particular way because they know what grief feels like. And we are comparing our grief to somebody else's grief when the context of the grief is tremendously different. Um, the body releases emotions when it feels safe enough, not when the calendar says it should, and not when others expect it to happen. Feeling nothing right now does not erase what matters or what mattered. It does not mean the grief has disappeared. It means the system, your body, your nervous system, is pacing itself. It is put in place for protection. Numbness is not a sign that grief failed to show up. It is grief showing up quietly, holding things together until there is room for more. Absence of feeling is not failure. It is information. It tells us the body is protecting what matters and releasing it slowly in time or in its own time when there is space. When numbness is present, the instinct is often to try to break through it, and people try to force tears, revisit memories repeatedly, or pressure themselves to feel something so they can prove grief is actually happening. And most of the time, that approach, it backfires. Forcing emotion can often lead to more shutdown, more frustration, and just self-criticism. The goal is not to make yourself feel. The goal is to create enough safety that feeling can return naturally. One of the most helpful starting points is actually naming what is happening without judgment, not fixing it, not diagnosing it, simply just acknowledging. And this is usually where I start with people, is to acknowledge where you are, to acknowledge what you feel or don't feel, acknowledge what is happening. You have to name it in order to be able to begin that starting process of moving toward healing. So some of the things you might say is like, I notice I feel disconnected right now, or I'm aware that things feel flat, or I'm not feeling much, and that's what's true today. So that it is simply being honest with what you are actually feeling or not feeling. And this kind of naming brings awareness without pressure, and it helps the nervous system feel seen rather than pushed to do something that it's not prepared to do. Now, grounding The body is also important. Numbness lives in the body, not just the mind, right? So simple physical routines help reestablish a sense of presence. So, walking, stretching, gentle movement, or steady breathing can remind the body that it is here and it is also supported. And these are not techniques to make emotions appear. They are ways to signal that your body is safe, that you are in a safe place to allow what you are feeling or the lack of feeling to process and come through. Also, rest matters, right? More than most people really realize. Numbness is often the result of prolonged stress and loss and emotional overload. So, giving yourself permission to rest without explaining your grief style to others can really reduce internal tension. You do not owe anyone visible emotion. Let me say that again. You do not owe anyone visible emotion, right? Support can be helpful when it is the right kind of help. So talking with someone who understands grief and does not rush the process can also offer steadiness, right? This might be a counselor, a chaplain, a support group, or a trusted friend who allows silence and does not try to fix what you are actually experiencing at the time. It is also important to just let numbness be present without treating it as a problem, right? Numbness often eases when it is not being resisted. When the body senses that it is allowed to move at its own pace, then it begins to soften on its own. Numbness does not need to be pushed away, it needs to be respected. As safety grows, emotion often returns gradually. And sometimes as sadness, sometimes as anger, sometimes as quiet grief that shows up in, unexpected moments. There is no timeline for this. There is no set way that it will show when it does appear. And there is only permission to let your body lead the way. Numbness softens when the system senses it does not have to defend itself anymore. Emotional numbness can be a natural and protective response to grief, but there are times when additional support becomes important. Not because numbness in itself is wrong, but because of what may be happening alongside it. So if numbness lasts for a long period of time and it begins to narrow your world, then that is a signal that is worth paying attention to. This can look like withdrawing from people you once felt connected to, losing interest in daily routines, or feeling increasingly disconnected from yourself and others. Now, when numbness is paired with isolation, then there's a sense of emptiness that feels heavy rather than neutral, or ongoing despair and support can help restore that balance back. Okay. Another important sign is when numbness comes with thoughts of wanting to disappear, not exist, or escape life altogether. Now, these thoughts do not always arrive loudly. Okay. Sometimes they show up quietly as indifference toward living, or a sense that it would be easier not to be here. When this happens, it is important to not carry it alone. Okay. Seeking professional support does not mean that you are broken or that your grief has gone wrong. It means your system has been holding a great deal for a long time and deserves care. Support offers a safe space where numbness does not have to be explained away or rushed. It provides space for your body and mind to slowly reconnect at a pace that feels manageable. Support can take many forms, okay? It might be counseling, spiritual care, grief support groups, or talking with a trusted professional or friend who understands loss and emotional shutdown. What matters most is that the space allows for honesty without pressure and presence without expectation. And reaching out is also not a sign of weakness, but it is a sign that you are paying attention to what you need and what your body is requiring. Grief is not meant to be navigated alone. It never was, right? Especially when feeling nothing starts to feel like too much to hold by yourself. Understand that you deserve support while your system finds its way back to feeling connection and steadiness one step at a time. Grief does not always arrive with tears or visible pain. Sometimes it arrives quietly. Sometimes it settles into the body as stillness, distance, or numbness that keeps you upright when everything else feels too heavy to hold. If you feel nothing right now, that doesn't mean you are disconnected from your loss. It means your body is doing what it knows how to do in this moment. It is protecting you. It is pacing the weight of what has happened. It is allowing you to survive what you could not yet feel all at once. There is no requirement to prove your grief through emotion. There is no standard timeline your body is failing to meet. Feeling nothing is not a sign that grief has skipped you. It is a sign that grief is moving carefully through you. Over time, feeling may return, or it may arrive in quiet ways that you do not expect. A sudden ache, a deep breath, a memory that lingers longer than usual, or simply a moment of awareness that something inside you has shifted. Until then, let this be enough. Your presence in your own life matters. Your body's response makes sense, and you do not need to rush yourself into emotion to honor what has been lost. Grief will find its voice when it's ready, and until it does, you are still grieving. You are still showing up, and that's enough for right now. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today on the Permission to Breathe podcast. If today's episode met you where you are, I hope you carry that steadiness with you as you move through the rest of your day. Remember, you do not have to rush what you are feeling, and you do not have to have it all figured out. You can also read the blog that coincides with this episode every Wednesday at drtammyisaac.com, where I continue the conversation and offer space for reflection in a different way. If this podcast has been helpful, please feel free to share it with someone who may need permission to breathe too. Until next time, take care of yourself, one breath at a time. I'm Dr. Tammy Isaac.